Ioka versus Kosei Tanaka. Let's talk about the fight. Those of you that have been following this channel long enough will know that this is not what I expected to happen. This isn't the outcome that I forecasted. I thought that this was a case of the old lion versus the young lion, where the old lion may have grown comfortable and complacent. The young lion will prove to be too much for him physically. Ahead of the fight, I talked about how maybe Kazuto is the better boxer. I mean, Kosei's implementation, it's a little bit more crude. It's a lot less subtle than what you get from Kazuto.
But maybe Kosei can pull it off.
Maybe Kosei can draw Kazuto out into a war where he can smother him, drown him behind his artillery, behind a barrage of punches. That's not the case. I want to say that in watching this thing, I didn't feel for a second that Kosei was in control of the action. I didn't feel for a second that Kosei was really winning this thing. There was a calmness to Kazuto, poise.
The kind that comes from experience.
The kind to where it looks a lot like maybe Kosei is just too easy for Kazuto to read as Kosei attempted to pin his man down, attempted to unload on him, but those shots, they were caught on the arms and gloves of Kazuto Ioka, who was quite surgical with those left hooks that were well placed, left hooks that, you know what, Kosei just didn't see him coming.
He dismantled Kosei Tanaka.
Say that Kazuto Ioka exhibited very deceptive power. The kind of power that doesn't necessarily come from brute force or just torque and leverage. Kazuto exhibited very, very deceptive power in the sense that even before he scored those two knockdowns in the 5th and 6th rounds, you know, I noticed how Kosei was eating some of those jabs from Kazuto.
He was snapping his head back.
And these were very well-placed, well-timed jabs that, much like those left hooks that Kosei later went on to absorb, finished him. These were shots that Kosei, for whatever reason, he just didn't see them coming. And I think that you can chalk that up to timing. The timing of Kazuto Ioka played a big factor in how this fight looked and how it ended.
Yeah, I wasn't really expecting Kosei to get ass beat like that.
I mean, I really wasn't. I'll go as far as saying that, you know, the feeling I had ahead of the fight, given that Kazuto Ioka had mentioned the winner of Chocolatito versus Estrada 2, that he's looking forward to locking horns with the winner of that fight. It kind of gave me the sense that, you know what, maybe Kazuto's a little bit too comfortable, and he's looking past this kid, and he don't need to be looking past this kid. That was the feeling I had ahead of the fight, but you know what, I was fucking wrong. I was way off.
Beat the fucking shit out of Kosei.
Kosei, who put forth a valiant effort after having been knocked down 2 times in the midway point of the match. It actually looked like Kosei had collected himself enough that he was getting back into the fight, though he was never in control of it. It did seem like he was gaining steam, gaining momentum, and in the 8th round, Kosei Tanaka...
He got rocked by a left hook.
He was out on his feet. Everybody could see it. He was staggered, rattled by the left hook. The referee intervened in time to prevent things from getting much, much worse for Kosei Tanaka than they already were. He was in a bad way.
This was not what I expected to happen.
Kazuto was very calm, cool, and collected throughout the entirety of this fight. He was very poised. He just never let Kosei have things his way. You could see that what Kosei wanted to do was pin this guy down, get close to him, stay on him, and trade shots deep in the pocket on the inside. But Kazuto, he does have some fancy feet.
I guess he wanted to win this thing more than I thought.
He was surgical in there. There's just no other way to put it, because I reiterate, there was never a moment in this fight where I felt like Kosei was in control of what was happening, or Kosei was winning the match. There was never a moment like that from the beginning of the fight to the end of the fight. As far as I'm concerned, you know, maybe it's just that Kosei, in spite of being a very formidable young fighter, 3-division champion, unbeaten before this New Year's Eve. In spite of all of that, maybe it's just that Kosei's style was too easy for Kazuto to read. Kazuto Ioka was officially integrated into the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list in July of last year after he battered Ashton Palikte for the newly vacated WBO title left behind by Donnie Nietes. And having already accomplished so much in his career at that time, Kazuto emerged in one of the top spots on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list. He emerged at number 4. At that time, he was already a 4-division champion. Throughout several updates, several fluctuations to the list and changes, fighters, vacating titles, moving up in weight, fighters subsequently being upset and bumped off, fighters like Julian Williams, fighters like Vasyl Lomachenko,
Former unified champion Daniel Roman,
Leo Santa Cruz, Kosei Tanaka, who eventually ended up vacating his WBO flyweight title to integrate himself into the super flyweight division.
There have been a lot of changes.
And throughout every single one of those changes, regardless of who was bumped off or who jumped on the list, Kazuto Ioka remained. A few fluctuations aside, Kazuto Ioka continued to exhibit the kind of longevity that accents his status as a pound-for-pound fighter, even if people in the West don't want to acknowledge him. Kazuto Ioka has already unseated 2 active reigning world champions in Kittipong Jiangrangjiang and Akira Yegashi. He is an active reigning 4-division champion. That being said, he's already more accomplished than several other fighters that grace many pound-for-pound lists in the West. But he doesn't get the accolades for it. He doesn't get the acknowledgement. I might have gotten this prediction wrong, but I'm proud to say that I've acknowledged Kazuto Ioka's quality for some time now, where many other boxing channels don't even know who the guy is. Many other well-known boxing periodicals and media outlets, they just don't cover him. And I think it's a travesty that this is going on, because Kazuto could very well be approaching the end of his career. He's already very accomplished. We talked about here on the channel how Kazuto plans on making a trip to the West for the winner of Chocolatito versus Estrada 2. Kazuto Ioka, unlike Jerwin Ancahat, the IBF's super flyweight champion, Kazuto means to unify, and you can see why. There just ain't a hell of a lot else left for this guy to do. In that way, he could very well be approaching the end of his career, having not received the praise, the accolades for it. Just doesn't make any fucking sense. You got guys like Gervonta Davis popping up in pound-for-pound lists when Kazuto Ioka has not only beaten the same number of world champions as Gervonta, but he's been a champion in 4 times as many weight classes. So what gives?
What do you want?
This guy got to sleep with to make a pound-for-pound list around here. Ultimately, the super flyweight division really is one of the more underrated divisions in the entire sport of boxing, and Kazuto Ioka is one of the more underrated fighters in the sport of boxing. But the guy's a pleasure to watch, and even if he proved me wrong this New Year's Eve, I got to take my hat off to this guy.
He's a hell of a fighter.
Congratulations to Kazuto Ioka. Middleweight news per tweet from Oscar De La Hoya. I'm having promising talks with Team Triple G for the best fight in boxing. Triple G Munguia 2021. Both fighters interested in fighting. And this is being confirmed on all sides, you understand. It's being confirmed by Oscar. It's being confirmed by Fernando Beltran of Zanfer Promotions. Those are the 2 outfits that promote and co-promote Jaime Munguia on both sides of the border, here in the United States and down there in Mexico. And with Gennady Golovkin's people having previously explored this option of fighting Jaime Munguia well over 12 months ago. Back then, the Nevada State Athletic Commission, they wouldn't let it happen. But here today in 2020, at the end of it, going into 2021, Jaime is a viable opponent option. He's campaigning at the same weight as Gennady Golovkin. He's had a couple of fights with a couple of fighters since then. And in all likelihood, this is going to be Gennady Golovkin's next fight. What do I think about this? Well, I told you guys before what school of thought is being employed. That the people over there at the Zone, people over there, Zanfer and Golden Boy and Gennady Golovkin's people, the Jaime Munguia fight might actually move the needle more than the Demetrius Andrade fight. It might. Demetrius doesn't have a fan base. And I'm not saying it's okay. I'm not condoning. I'm not condemning. I'm just explaining.
This fight might generate more revenue.
This fight might generate more interest, and that is a bit more in keeping with DAZN's bottom line. They want fights that are going to move the needle, and I'm sorry to say that Demetrius Andrade, skilled fighter that he might be, he only really appeals to hardcores. Only hardcores know him. He doesn't move the needle. Whereas Jaime is a segue to the Mexican-American fans. I mean, why do you think they're trying to stage this thing on Cinco de Mayo? What fans do you think they're trying to appeal to? Mexican style, big drama show. It's the same old shtick.
What about the Eddie Hines stuff?
What about the stuff he said about going to the higher-ups at DAZN and pitching them that idea that they have a contract with Gennady and they have a contract with Demetrius? Well, my thoughts on that are maybe that's something he plans on doing after this Munguia fight comes into fruition. After this fight takes place. Because, the Canelo-Alvarez rubber match, the third fight, whatever you want to call it, it being that Canelo Alvarez has every intention of campaigning as a super middleweight henceforth, maybe that third Golovkin fight don't happen, at least not in the immediate future. We know what Canelo Alvarez plans on doing for at least the next two fights. And if Gennady insists on campaigning as a middleweight as opposed to a super middleweight where he would have to be to get that Canelo Alvarez fight, if Gennady insists on staying at 160 pounds, well, maybe that Demetrius Andrade fight is something they can try to put together for the future, somewhere down the line, though I'm not very optimistic, because it would still require Gennady to accept the fight, and I'm not convinced that he does. It's looking like Jaime Munguia is going to be Gennady's next opponent. And Jaime Munguia being his next opponent, that doesn't necessarily take the Andrade unification match off the table. It doesn't.
Oh.
In the in-between time, maybe Demetrius can take care of his mandatory challenger in Liam Williams.
And they revisit that Gennady Golovkin proposition afterwards.
If they do, I'm really not optimistic that fight happens. I think that Gennady Golovkin views a champion like Demetrius Andrade as more trouble than he's worth. We know what stage in Gennady's career he's in. He's in the late stages. But better still, if they're going to try at that fight and try to make it, it would probably be after the Munguia fight. Because like I told you, they view the Munguia fight as a more attractive option. And it's obvious.
That's without condoning or condemning.
Because, some people out there, they like the fight. And some people don't. It all depends on who you ask. But ultimately,
As soon as he became an option, that's who I felt he was going to go with.
And finally, per tweet from Michael Benson, I'm sure most of you have heard by now that Amir Khan has declared that he wants to fight Brook in 2021. Brook, who's always been running his mouth, I think it is about time now I put him in his place. Shut him up for good. Yeah, shut him up when he's coming off a knockout loss to Terence Crawford, right? And you're probably going to try to fight him as a welterweight instead of at junior middleweight. A better weight for Brook than 147 pounds.
Right.
It's really not hard to understand why Amir Khan, at this point in his career, is entertaining such a match with his domestic rival, Brook.
It's the last money fight he can make.
It literally is. I want you guys to understand something. Perhaps in the UK domestic scene, this fight is well past the sell-by date. Perhaps to some of the fight fans over there in that part of the world, they are no longer interested in seeing the faded husk of Brook versus the faded husk of Amir Khan. That might be true, but I don't necessarily think it's Brook that Amir Khan is looking to get at.
Oh.
I think that Amir Khan is looking at Brook as a segue to get back to Eddie. And he wants to get back to Eddie to get to that DAZN bag, that DAZN money, because DAZN has expanded to 200 territories around the world. Those different markets open up different venue options that a fighter like Amir Khan can capitalize on. Very similar to how he capitalized on that weirdo promotion over there in the Far East against Billy Gibb. It was reported that he scored a rather sizable payday for having participated on that card, participated in that promotion. That was after he was stopped by Terence Crawford. It was also reported that there was some discrepancy in what he actually made for the fight, but better still, we know what Amir Khan has his mind set on. I don't think he actually wants to settle the score with Brook so much as he views Brook as a segue to Eddie and Eddie as a segue to the bag.
There's one fundamental problem, though.
Two, actually, the fight fans, the boxing scene that this fight used to appeal to the most, it doesn't appeal to them as much here in 2020. To the fight fans over there in the United Kingdom, this is a fight that is kind of past the sell-by date. That's really one problem, that you might have to look elsewhere in the world to market this fight outside of the United Kingdom, because as a Sky Sports pay-per-view, it might not do as well now in 2020 as it could have done years before. That's a problem that maybe you don't want to stage this thing in the UK. It's that. But there's also Brook's fractured relationship with Eddie Heine. If you're looking at Brook as a segue to Eddie, your problem is Kel and Eddie are on the outs.
Did you guys forget?
Eddie was upset that Kel more or less left him out of the loop when it came to those Terrence Crawford negotiations, and Brook is upset that Sky Sports made the decision not to pick up the Crawford fight. That arm of revenue wasn't there for him. Those guys' relationship, it's fractured, and I don't know how reparable or irreparable it is. But if the basic idea here is to use Kel Brook as a segue to Eddie, and Eddie as a segue to get to that DAZN money, well, yeah, there might be some bumps in the road.
If Matchroom doesn't promote this thing, who will?
If Matchroom doesn't promote it and DAZN doesn't pick it up, there's not much chance of either Kel Brook or Amir Khan especially, there's not much chance of those guys making the kind of money they're looking to make.
Everybody ain't got Matchroom's resources.
Not everybody's promoting fights in several countries around the world, and not everybody has a major deal with a major platform that makes fights available in 200 plus territories around the world. So rest assured, if Khan is thinking of Brook, who he's really thinking about is Eddie. And if he's thinking about Eddie, what he's really thinking about is that DAZN money, that DAZN bag.
So can he get it?
I'll tell you even now that if you play your cards right, this could actually be a successful event, even if the main event is past the sell-by date. If you decorate the undercard, put some culottes on it, you might actually have a solid fight card. You might. But that's if Eddie Hearn feels like bothering with either of these two guys, and I don't know that he does. I don't know that he'd want to.
I just know that he doesn't have to.
He's got no shortage of fights and fight cards and transatlantic situations that he's already got his finger in. So he's gonna deal with these two fucking guys?
I don't know. We're just gonna have to wait and see.